When my wife's mother whispered to my wife, she slapped me so hard that I fell to the floor. Just as she was about to leave, something shocking made her freeze in fear. Then her voice trembled because, the moment my wife's hand connected with my face, the entire world shifted. I didn't see it coming. 1 second, we were sitting at the dinner table, the flow of conversation and clinking silverware filling the air. The next, my cheek exploded with a sharp, stinging pain as my head snapped to the side. My body followed, tilting dangerously before I lost balance and hit the floor with a dull thud. The impact sent a ringing sensation through my skull, my vision blurring at the edges. For a long second, I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. I lay there, my palms flat against the cool wooden floor, my breath stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The taste of salt and iron lingered on my tongue. Whether from the slap or the shock, I wasn't sure. Then, I heard her voice. "How could you?" Claire's voice was sharp, raw with fury. I blinked up at her, confused. My mind raced, flipping through every possible offense I could have committed, but nothing made sense. We had been fine just moments ago. In fact, the dinner had been pleasant, or so I'd thought. My gaze flickered toward Lorraine, her mother, who sat stiffly at the other end of the table. Her lips were pursed, her expression unreadable. A moment ago, she had leaned in to whisper something into Claire's ear, her voice so low I couldn't make out the words, but whatever she had said, it had transformed my wife in an instant. Claire had been smiling. Now, her face was a storm of betrayal and fury. I pushed myself upright, still dazed. "Claire, what are you?" "Don't," she snapped, her voice quivering, her hands balled into fists at her sides, her entire body trembling. "Just don't." I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't a moment of fleeting anger. This was something deeper. Something that had cracked open a part of her that I wasn't sure I could fix. "What did I do?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Claire, talk to me." Her breathing was uneven. For a brief moment, hesitation flickered in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Instead, she turned away from me, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the door. Panic flared in my chest. This wasn't normal. We had arguments like any couple, but Claire had never been violent. She had never lashed out like this, had never looked at me with such hatred. I scrambled to my feet. "Claire, wait." She ignored me. She was almost at the door when something strange happened. Her stride faltered. She came to an abrupt stop, her entire body rigid, her back straight as if someone had just whispered her name from the shadows. A thick silence settled over the room. I frowned. "Claire." She didn't answer. Her fingers twitched around the strap of her purse, and when she turned her head slightly, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not anger. Not betrayal. Pure, raw fear. Her shoulders lifted with a slow, shaky inhale. The anger she had worn so openly only moments ago had drained from her expression, replaced by something hollow, something unreadable. A cold weight pressed against my chest. What the hell was going on? I took a slow step toward her. "Claire." She flinched. I froze. My own wife was afraid of me. I had never hurt Claire. Not once, not even by accident. And yet, the way she recoiled, the way her breath hitched like she was standing in the presence of a monster, sent a sharp, slicing pain through me that had nothing to do with the slap. Lorraine stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She moved with eerie calm, her expression composed. "Come, Claire," she said, her voice gentle, almost soothing. "You don't have to stay here." She reached for Claire's arm, and for a second, I thought my wife would follow her without hesitation. But Claire didn't move. She just stood there, still staring at the door, her knuckles turning white around the strap of her purse. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to shake Claire, to force her to tell me what the hell was happening, why she had struck me, why she suddenly looked like she had seen a ghost. But I knew pushing her right now wouldn't help. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to remain steady. "Claire, whatever this is, we can talk about it." She didn't respond. Lorraine's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was too tight, too forced. She squeezed Claire's arm gently. "You don't owe him anything, darling. Let's go." Claire finally turned. Her gaze met mine, and for a moment, it felt like she wanted to say something. Something important. But then, she swallowed thickly, her expression closing off. She nodded at her mother. And without another word, she walked out the door. I stood there, rooted in place, my heart hammering in my chest. The cold air from outside seeped into the house as the door swung shut behind them. Silence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I ran a hand down my face, wincing as my fingers brushed over the sore spot on my cheek. I still didn't know what I had done, but I knew one thing for sure. That slap had changed everything. I never imagined my marriage would come to this. As I stood alone in the dimly lit dining room, the sting on my cheek long forgotten, my mind drifted back to the beginning. The days when Claire and I were inseparable, when love was simple, untainted by whispers, lies, or betrayal. I met Claire on a rainy afternoon at Rivertown Cafe. I remember that day vividly, as if it were carved into my memory. The cafe had been packed, the scent of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries lingering in the air. I had barely managed to squeeze through the crowd when I made the fatal mistake of trying to balance a large cappuccino, my laptop bag, and a book under my arm. The result? Disaster. I tripped on the leg of a chair, sending my coffee flying and straight onto the table of an unsuspecting woman. Papers went everywhere, brown liquid soaking through neatly written notes. My heart stopped as I looked up, expecting outrage, maybe even curses thrown in my direction. Instead, I found Claire. She blinked at the mess before slowly lifting her gaze to meet mine. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips, and then, to my absolute shock, she laughed. Not just a polite chuckle but a genuine, melodic laugh that softened the tension in my chest. "I hope you weren't planning on passing those off as your own assignments," she teased, lifting one of the drenched sheets. I was speechless. In that moment, drenched papers and embarrassment faded into the background. All I could see was her. The way her hazel eyes crinkled at the edges, the way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear, the way she seemed to glow even under the dim lights of the cafe. From that moment on, I was hooked. We spent hours talking that day. She told me she was a high school English teacher, passionate about literature and poetry. I told her I worked in finance, a job I found dull but necessary. She laughed at my dry sense of humor. I admired her boundless optimism. We were opposites in many ways. Where I was cautious and logical, she was free-spirited and adventurous. But somehow, we fit together seamlessly, like two puzzle pieces destined to meet. Our love story unfolded effortlessly. Dates turned into weekends together. Weekends turned into moving in. 1 year later, I got down on one knee in that very same cafe, holding out a ring with shaking hands. Claire had tears in her eyes when she said yes, her voice barely a whisper. Our wedding was small, but beautiful. She wore a simple, elegant dress. And as she walked down the aisle, I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone more breathtaking. We exchanged vows under the old oak tree in her grandmother's backyard, promising forever without hesitation. For the first year, everything was perfect. We bought a cozy little home on the outskirts of town, a fixer-upper with a leaky roof and creaky floors. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We spent late nights painting the walls, sneaking kisses in between brushstrokes. We talked about the future, kids, family vacations, growing old together. Then, Lorraine moved in. Just for a while, Claire had said. She's struggling after the divorce. At first, I agreed. I understood Claire's desire to help her mother. Lorraine had always been a sharp, opinionated woman, but I never thought she would become a problem. I assumed she'd stay for a few months, get back on her feet, and leave. But she never left. Slowly, things started to change. At first, it was small, subtle comments, passive-aggressive remarks. Lorraine never said anything outright, but I could feel her disapproval in the way she looked at me, the way she sighed whenever I entered the room. "You're lucky Claire settled," she once muttered when she thought I wasn't listening. She could have done so much better. I tried to ignore it, to brush off her remarks as the bitterness of a woman who had lost everything in a nasty divorce. But Claire started changing too. She used to be warm, affectionate. Now, she was guarded, distant. I'd come home from work, excited to tell her about my day, only to find her sitting with Lorraine, whispering. If I asked what they were talking about, Claire would glance at me, her expression unreadable. "Nothing important," she'd say, but I knew that wasn't true. The worst part was that I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment Claire stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as someone else. Someone untrustworthy. Someone she questioned. Lorraine had poisoned her against me, drop by drop, day by day, until the Claire I knew was barely recognizable. I could feel myself losing her, but I didn't know how to stop it. The moment at the dinner table, the slap, the rage in her eyes, was just the final confirmation of something I had feared for months. She wasn't mine anymore. Not entirely. And the worst part? I still didn't know what Lorraine had said to make her snap like that. As I stood in our empty dining room, staring at the overturned chair from where I had fallen, a crushing sense of helplessness settled over me. My wife, the woman I had built a life with, had looked at me as if I were a stranger. I needed to find out why. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. Who could I talk to? Who would believe me? Marcus, my best friend since college. The only person who had seen my relationship with Claire from the beginning, who had stood by my side through thick and thin. He had never liked Lorraine, always warning me to be careful around her. Maybe he had seen something I hadn't. I pressed his name and brought the phone to my ear. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey man, what's up?" His voice was casual, but I could hear the underlying concern. I never called him this late unless something was wrong. I exhaled slowly. "Claire hit me." There was a long pause. "Then what?" "She slapped me. Out of nowhere. We were at dinner, and her mom whispered something to her. And the next thing I know, I'm on the floor." Marcus cursed under his breath. "What did she say to her?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but whatever it was bad." Claire looked different, like she was afraid of me. A long silence stretched between us before Marcus finally spoke. "You know what I've always said about Lorraine?" I swallowed. "Yeah. She's playing a long game," Marcus muttered. "And she's winning." I clenched my jaw. I couldn't let this be the end of my marriage. I needed answers. I needed the truth. And I had a sinking feeling that whatever Lorraine had told Claire, whatever lie she had planted, was just the beginning of a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. I sat in silence, the sting of Claire's slap, nothing compared to the growing ache in my chest. My hands rested on the table, fingers curled into fists as I stared at the empty space where my wife had been moments ago. My mind raced, replaying the last few minutes over and over, searching for an answer, any answer that could explain what had just happened. Claire had never hit me before, not once, not even in the heat of an argument. And yet, tonight, she had struck me with a force so strong it knocked me to the ground. To Claire, I knew the woman I had fallen in love with, would never have done that unless she truly believed I had done something unforgivable. My eyes drifted to Lorraine, who still sat at the table, sipping from her glass of wine with an air of satisfaction. She hadn't moved, hadn't flinched when Claire's hand had connected with my face. It was almost as if she had expected it. No, she had wanted it. Slowly, I forced myself to speak. "What did you say to her?" Lorraine lifted her gaze, her expression perfectly composed. "Excuse me." I leaned forward, my voice low, controlled. "You whispered something to Claire, and the next thing I know, she's slapping me like I just confessed to some horrible crime." "What did you say?" Lorraine sighed, setting her glass down with an exaggerated shake of her head. "Honestly, dear, I don't know why you're looking at me like that. I didn't make Claire do anything. If she reacted that way, perhaps you should be asking yourself why." I clenched my jaw. Lorraine was a master manipulator. I had known that since the first time I met her. She didn't attack with outright hostility. No, she preferred something far worse. She planted seeds of doubt, whispered lies in the shadows, twisted words until reality bent to her will. And Claire, my beautiful, strong, intelligent wife, had fallen for it. I forced myself to take a deep breath. Getting angry wouldn't help. I needed to focus. I needed to understand what Lorraine had done, how she had gotten into Claire's head so easily. Then, something caught my eye. A small object lay on the floor near the leg of my chair. At first, I thought it was just my wallet, which must have fallen from my pocket when Claire slapped me. But then, I noticed something beside it. A letter. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't just any letter. It was that letter, the one I had buried in the back of my desk, hidden away for years. A letter I had never intended for Claire to see. A chill ran down my spine as I reached for it. My fingers trembling slightly. The paper was worn, the edges creased from years of neglect. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. I already knew every word by heart. And now, Claire did too. A sickening realization settled in my gut. Lorraine must have found it. She had given it to Claire. And whatever lies she had spun around it had been enough to make my wife snap. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed to find Claire. I stood abruptly, shoving the letter into my pocket. Lorraine raised a single eyebrow, her lips twitching into something that resembled amusement. "Running after her, are you?" she mused. How predictable. I ignored her and strode toward the door. "Be careful, dear," she called after me. "Claire's not as naive as you think. She sees you now." I froze, my hand gripping the doorknob. She sees me? What the hell did that mean? I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at Lorraine now, I might lose whatever self-control I had left. Instead, I stepped outside, slamming the door behind me. The night air was cold, but I barely felt it. My mind was consumed by one thought: finding Claire. She hadn't taken the car, which meant she was on foot, but where would she go? I knew my wife. When she needed space, she went to one of two places: the park a few blocks away or the old bookstore downtown where she used to spend hours browsing for novels she never had time to read. I started with the park. The streets were quiet, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows along the pavement. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I approached the park entrance, my breath coming in short bursts. Then I saw her. Claire stood near the fountain, her back to me, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Her posture was tense, her head slightly bowed. I swallowed hard, forcing down the knot in my throat. "Claire." I said softly. She stiffened but didn't turn around. I took a careful step closer. Claire, please. Just talk to me. She let out a shaky breath. Why do you have that letter? Her voice was raw, barely above a whisper. I hesitated, then pulled it from my pocket because I never threw it away. Slowly, she turned. Her eyes were red, her expression torn between anger and something else. Something far worse, betrayal. Her gaze dropped to the letter in my hands. You lied to me. I shook my head. No, Claire, I didn't. Then explain, she demanded, her voice trembling. Because my mother told me everything, and I don't know what to believe anymore. I clenched my jaw. Lorraine had done what she did best. She had twisted the truth, wrapped it up in enough venom to make Claire doubt everything she thought she knew. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Claire, whatever your mother told you, I need you to hear it from me. Please. She didn't move, but she didn't walk away either. So I took a breath and prepared to tell her the truth. The truth about the letter. The truth about my past. And the truth about the one person I had spent my entire life trying to forget. Claire wasn't just angry. She was afraid. That was the part that gutted me the most. I had seen Claire upset before. Frustrated. Even distant during our worst arguments. But fear? That was new. And it wasn't the kind of fear that came from uncertainty or misunderstanding. No. This was something deeper. Something that had wrapped itself around her so tightly that she was trembling. And all because of that letter. She held it in her hands now, gripping the paper so tightly that it crinkled under her fingers. She hadn't spoken since I told her I would explain everything. Instead, she just stood there, her breathing uneven, her gaze flickering between me and the worn envelope as if waiting for me to admit to some unspeakable crime. I took a careful step forward. Claire, I don't. Her voice was sharp, but it wavered at the edges. She shook her head, taking a step back. I need space. I can't be near you right now. The words hit harder than I expected. Space. It was such a simple word, yet in that moment, it felt like the final crack in an already fragile glass, ready to shatter completely. I swallowed hard. Claire, please. Just let me explain. But she wasn't listening. She clutched the letter to her chest as if it were some kind of shield, protecting her from the person she suddenly believed I had become. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her pace quickening with each step. I wanted to follow her. I wanted to grab her hand, make her look at me, force her to see that whatever Lorraine had told her was a lie. But something in me knew that if I pushed right now, I'd lose her completely. So I let her go. I watched as she disappeared down the sidewalk, the wind tugging at her hair, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep from falling apart. Then, after a long moment, I turned and walked in the opposite direction. I needed help. I needed someone who would listen. Someone who would believe me. There was only one person I could think of. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marcus, my best friend since college. The one person who had never trusted Lorraine from the start. I hit the call button and brought the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice. Then, yo, what's up, man? Marcus's voice was casual, but I could hear the underlying concern. I never called him this late unless something was wrong. I exhaled sharply. I need to talk. There was a pause. That bad? Worse. Another pause. Then, come over. Marcus lived about 10 minutes away, and I barely registered the drive. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my thoughts racing in 100 different directions. By the time I pulled into his driveway, my pulse was pounding in my ears. The porch light flicked on as I stepped out of the car, and a second later, the front door swung open. Marcus stood in the doorway, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, his expression serious. All right, he said, stepping aside to let me in. Tell me everything. I didn't even wait for him to close the door before I started talking. She hit me, I said, my voice hollow. Claire, she slapped me out of nowhere. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Wait, what? I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the length of his living room. We were at dinner. Everything was fine. And then Lorraine leaned in, whispered something to her. And the next thing I know, she's looking at me like I'm the worst person in the world. And then, I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. She just lost it. Marcus let out a low whistle. What did Lorraine say? I stopped pacing. I don't know. Marcus folded his arms. Okay, but Claire has never been the type to just react like that. What triggered her? I hesitated, then pulled the crumpled letter from my pocket and held it out. Marcus took it, frowning as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the words, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. Damn, he muttered. This is from I cut in. Him. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. And Claire saw this. She didn't just see it, I said. Lorraine gave it to her. She must have found it in the house and spun it into something worse. And now Claire thinks I've been hiding some huge secret from her.